Good evening and welcome to the Job Search Solution, the radio program where we talk about looking for a job, changing careers, hiring. And as always, we begin with a prayer. Dear God, grant us thy peace and thy mercy, thy will be done. As always, every Wednesday evening, we have Rich Levinsky coming to us in the next two sessions, talking about consulting in the workplace. He always has some interesting observations. He does a lot of research and totally really knows what's going on in the trenches there. I also want to remind everyone that we've given away free books. I've written 5 books on how to find a job, and we have a few left over here. All you have to do is email me, tony@babich.com, tony@babich.com. We'll include your address and we'll send you a free book. In this session, I wanted to discuss the top 10 mistakes that candidates make in subsequent and follow-up interviews after an initial interview. So often candidates think that because they're going back, in fact, that's the first mistake. They think that because they're being invited back, they're going to get hired. And they go out and spend their first paycheck without even realizing that this is just one step towards the hiring process. I've seen as many as 16 steps beyond the first initial step. The average is about 4, but you got to remember that just because you're going back for a second interview doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting hired. Second mistake is that they treat the subsequent and follow-up interviews in the same way as they treated the initial interview, thinking it's the same. The guy or gal that asked me questions in the first interview they're going to ask me the same questions in the second and third and fourth and fifth interviews, and they're not the same. You can't be sure that they're going to be the same at all. The third mistake is not knowing how many other candidates are being moved to the next step and what their backgrounds are. And it's important for you to ask how many other people are going back to the next interviews and what is their backgrounds? How do I stack up with those people? It's a whole new ball game. It's like the playoffs in the sports, in the professional sports. Playoffs are a totally different thing. The next mistake is not soliciting help from the initial interviewing authority, promoting you to the next step. You got to say to that person, are you going to promote me? How can you promote me? What do I need to know about it? And so forth, and get them to help you become the finalist. Fifth mistake is they don't understand how the subsequent interviews might differ from the initial interviews. Just last week, I had a candidate go to a subsequent interview. It was like the 4th interview, and it was done by a consultant who had a totally different outlook on the job and the company and everything. And he was totally out of pace with what the company was when the candidate interviewed. And he had been through 2 interviews, and he was going to the 3rd with the consultant, and the consultant's attitude towards the thing was totally different, and he wasn't ready for it. The 6th mistake is they don't research the company and the position as well as the people doing the subsequent interviewing, even more depth than the initial interview. Everybody teaches you to interview and do research on the initial interviewer, but very few people teach you got to ask lots of questions and do a lot of research on other people that are interviewing. They have just as much to say about it as anybody. And in fact, the kiss of death is when somebody says, hey, they're just tire kickers. They don't mean very much. If they're interviewing you, they can say something about it. They can say no. If they can't say no, then they wouldn't be interviewing you. 7th mistake is they don't make some kind of going the extra mile effort in subsequent interviews, coming up with collateral stuff like 30, 60, 90-day plans, what they do in the first 90 days of the job, something that sets them apart from the other people that are going to be doing the interviewing. And even asking and finding out from the initial interviewing people what I can do to set myself apart. The eighth thing is they start to relax and forget that in subsequent interviews, their more excellent candidates are going to be involved, and they're going to make a difference. It's that the competition gets tougher. Competition gets tougher in the playoffs. Competition gets tougher in subsequent interviews. And so you got to be aware of that and ask about the competition and know that it's going to be tougher. The ninth mistake is that they neglect to get support from subsequent interviewing authorities. I mentioned a little about this before, but are you going to support me? If you had 4 people before you interviewing, are you going to support me? Can you make a difference can you help me? Are you going to tell them to hire me? Get the support of those people that you interviewed with beforehand. And then number 10, not realizing how crucial subsequent interviews are. They are the ones that make it or break it. The initial interviews, everybody thinks are the ones that get the job, but they're not. They're just the gates. They're the first ones you go through. And those subsequent interviews are the crucial ones. And the more of them you have, the more crucial they become. They are often very difficult, and most candidates aren't ready for them. So think about that when you go to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever number of interviews. And by the way, the lady that was supposed to interview with 16 people got to about the fifth one, found out she was going to interview with 16 people, and took herself out of the running, said 16 people, it's ridiculous to make a decision. So it can be, the ridiculousness can be done on the other side of the desk too. All right, we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned. This is Tony Bashara with the Job Search Solution.